Hello, everyone. This is Scott Dill with Real Story Group, and our CEO and founder, Tony Byrne, is here with us as well. Thank you for coming to today's webinar. We're going to be talking through CDP market trends for 2021. Certainly an exciting topic for us. We've been having a number of conversations with our customers over the last couple of years now, but especially within the last several months about CDPs, and we're going to share with you some thoughts on the marketplace and what we're seeing now, what we expect to see in the coming months. So stay tuned for that. Tony will take you through the heart of today's presentation, but as we get started, I just want to mention a couple of quick housekeeping items of note and then give you a little bit of a background about Real Story Group. So for those of you who are our subscribers, you will be able to access this in your subscriber library after the presentation, and then everyone who's here will also be able to get a copy of the slides. So stay tuned from that from our marketing team, and then we may have some time for questions at the end. So if you have those, please enter those into the questions tab and I go to webinar control panel. If we don't get to you today, we will be sure to reach out to you over the next couple of days with any feedback from your questions. So we'll keep an eye out for that. But just to give you a quick high level about Real Story Group, we're an analyst firm. We've been at this for almost 20 years now. What's different about us versus traditional analyst firms is that we never work for the vendors that we cover here on this map. So, our primary focus is only on technology users and buyers, and giving you the ins and outs on what the vendors do well, but also where they might fall short for you. The other thing that is unique about us is that we're only focused on the MarTech or omnichannel tech stack. So in that regard, we're able to really cover more vendors in this space than traditional analyst firms do. So, if you look at, say, the web content management space where we got our start, we're covering 35 different vendors. And in the CDP space that we're going to get into today, we have 29 different products that we evaluate in our research. So it gives you more choices as a technology user and buyer to make sure that you're getting the solution that's going to be the right fit for your particular needs. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tony, who's going to walk you through the market trends for 2021. Tony?
Great, thanks, Scott. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but again, those of you who are subscribers will get a recorded version of this recorded video that you can share with your colleagues, and the rest of you will also get a copy of this deck. So there's really 5 key trends I'm going to get at here over the next 25 minutes or so. One is around enterprise data integration, external modeling. We'll talk a little bit about the omnichannel future, this trend towards engagement light, what are the pros and cons there. Definitely an expertise shortage and what you should do about that. And then I've got a bonus kind of non-trend at the end that I think you'll find very interesting, particularly if you're in the market for customer data technology. So with that, let's jump into it. I think one of the things that we like to ground all of our conversations around the MarTech stack is this kind of omni-channel reference architecture model. This is a reference architecture model. It's a platform architecture model. Separately, we have a services model as well. But let's today linger on this platform architecture model. And our contention is that over the next decade, rather than putting a lot of emphasis into modernizing our content and engagement management platforms that you see in this kind of middle row here, that many of you are going to be investing in these enterprise foundation platforms, which will provide services and capabilities that can span multiple different business models, certainly multiple different engagement channels. And that this is really the only way to do a customer-centric digital strategy. And you can see down here in the orange, customer data platforms play a key role. In fact, we would argue are probably table stakes with respect to any kind of enterprise foundation platform strategy. And so integration obviously comes to the fore. What we think is going to be a big deal over the next year or two is around data fabric integration rather than replicating these services. So the background to this is that the CDP industry really kind of grew up as sort of a marketing liberation front, that you would provide a lot of data services in a single platform that marketers could use. And over time, I think we've come to recognize, particularly among larger enterprises, that the customer data ecosystem is necessarily going to be bigger than just your customer data platform. And so integrating into what we would describe as the enterprise data fabric, I think is becoming increasingly urgent for many of you. And exactly how you do this is going to become a key consideration. So this is a traditional view of CDP services. Many of you have seen charts like this where you've got source data on the left, and then you're doing some interesting stuff with it. In the middle here, device stitching, data enrichment, relationship graphing, certainly identity resolution, segmentation, rules activation, data cleaning, and ETL. Just a whole melange of things in a customer data platform, and then pushing out to all of these different engagement services. So this, I think, was the original concept, and many CDP vendors still play this out. But the reality is, over time, is that this is, as marketing meets the enterprise, we need to have a sort of more nuanced view of this, where in many cases you already have an enterprise data fabric where you're doing some core data management around ingestion, transforming, cleaning, processing. Certainly compliance often belongs there. And then a customer data activation space, which is much more marketing and business focused, where you've got the customer API, segmentation services, event handling, hopefully, activation services, and then potentially in parentheses here, some optional services. So both of these are legitimate scope for a CDP. In other words, you could just have a CDP that's just focused on customer data activation. It's going to assume that back in your data ecosystem, you have this enterprise data fabric that's supplying a lot of these other core services. For some of you, you may not have that, or you have it, but you don't have access to it. So you're essentially going to replicate it for just the marketing team. And so there's a lot of different models for this. What we think is more likely, particularly among those of you from large enterprises, to play out is that you're likely to leverage your existing data lake, data warehouse, data processing services that you are building in probably a fast evolving enterprise customer data fabric, and that therefore your CDP needs to be able to integrate with that fabric. That won't be all of you, but we think that this is definitely a trend. And so to some extent that may narrow the scope of a CDP, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. This has obvious marketplace considerations as well, because if you look at the market of the 30 or so CDP vendors that Real Story Group follows, there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice the market. One of the ways that we do is using these kind of three cones, which is, what does the CDP emphasize? That platform, is it primarily activation at the top, or primarily more enterprise data management down on the lower left, or primarily data, analytics and reporting? And then there's some that kind of float a little bit in between. And so there's definitely been a bifurcation, or almost a kind of a trifurcation in the market around emphasis. Now, of course, every vendor will tell you that they can check all the boxes, but the reality is that all vendors have focus, and focus is a good thing. It allows you to potentially get a good fit. So this kind of tension, sometimes creative tension, between data management and data activation is really, I think, almost a foundational trend in the market, and it's going to accelerate over the next year or two, and it really plays off on the next four trends that I'm going to raise here. But really, what this kind of means is, if we look at this blue box down here, which is what we call intelligence hubs, which is data processing, analytics, reporting, and visualization, predictive modeling, dashboards. The question is, do I want to subsume those services within my CDP, or do I want the CDP to have a narrower scope and leverage those services which may already exist in the enterprise? That's really the core question that's getting asked here. We think increasingly that enterprises are going to do what they need to do to make peace between the orange people and the blue people here, so that you can really leverage some of the capabilities that you have deeper within your enterprise. In some cases, you can't, or those capabilities don't exist, and so you may want to then nestle those within a more robust and comprehensive CDP. The second trend, which is already transpiring and kind of goes against a lot of CDP vendor marketing, is what I would call externalized machine learning and artificial intelligence. By externalized, I mean outside of the CDP. So CDP vendors have spent the last 2 years really playing up their snazzy ML services. They demo very well, and many roadmaps are focused on really doing even more of this. This is attractive to marketing people who sense that maybe they should be using these capabilities but don't necessarily know how. And so having this kind of black box already built into my CDP seems kind of cool. But I think that one of the lessons that we're learning, again, this is even more the case among larger enterprises, is that much of your modeling and artificial intelligence is likely to happen at a lower level in your stack where you have access to more data. So it's more likely to be more realistically seated at a data lake or data warehouse, even more likely the data lake where you have all of the data, as opposed to the CDP, which is functionally really kind of a data mart here. And so the CDP may not have all of the entire universe of data, and therefore may not be as robust and in terms of a modeling, enterprise area. You also may have investments, both people and tooling, in AI and ML for other capabilities beyond marketing and customer experience, and so you might want to leverage those as well. So we think that the real trend over the next year is going to be CDP platforms having to ingest and incorporate models that were built outside of the CDP, and we're beginning to see that among some more forward-looking vendors, rather than saying that they would do it all themselves. So here again, it raises the question: do I want my CDP to handle this predictive modeling and some of the, and other sort of machine-assisted modeling, or do I want to rely on that from other enterprise services? And we think we're definitely seeing a trend of more mature organizations realizing that those capabilities are probably better seated outside of the CDP, and the CDP becomes a kind of a repository of those models rather than a creator of those models. The third trend is around omnichannel use cases. This may be more of an aspiration than a trend, but you know that CDPs have largely grown up around marketing, the marketing cone within the enterprise marketing and MarTech and marketing operations. That they funded CDPs in many cases, implemented them in many cases, and used marketing use cases to justify them. And vendors have definitely caught sight of this. What we think, and so it looks sort of like this, where a lot of the focus of the CDP is in, driving towards personalized web experiences and app experiences, certainly outbound marketing and potentially social engagement. But one of the interesting things that we note when we look at some of our more sophisticated subscribers in our basin is that increasingly you see, if you're going to be truly customer focused, that you want your CDP to be able to activate and provide data support for not just marketing, but also potentially CRM and Salesforce automation, service and support, and any number of other potential engagement environments where engagement platforms and engagement channels where your customers are showing up for true full cycle, journey support. So a couple things are happening here. One is definitely we're seeing more enterprises sort of focusing on this as a discriminator, because it is a discriminator among the vendors, and also some enterprises looking for some at least lightweight orchestration services within their CDP. Now, I don't always recommend this because they will be light in your CDP, but it's not an unreasonable thing to bundle those two, at least as an intermediary kind of step here. So the other way that you might cast this is that in the future, CDP, you might think of this trend as CDPs beyond marketing, right? That it's not just marketing use cases that are going to drive the value of these things, but more truly omnichannel journey support. The fourth trend that we're seeing, this is being driven by vendors, and therefore we need to be a little bit skeptical of it, is what we call engagement services light. So obviously CDPs have always wanted an intimate relationship between the customer data platform, the data that's in the customer data platform, and the various engagement channels that you're trying to support. And of the 10 use cases that we look at with respect to CDP is at least 4 of them are marketing oriented in terms of actually supporting engagement. Now, the key distinction here is, Do you want the CDP to actually support these use cases by providing data and segments? Or do you want the CDP platform to actually execute these use cases? In other words, to do the recommendations, to actually perform the personalization, to actually send the email, to actually do the real-time event trigger. And so this is a really interesting question, because you're really crossing a kind of a Rubicon once you go from actually supporting a particular use case to actually executing that use case. And so you want to be really clear about that. You know, in a purist sort of architecture, you kind of divide these sorts of things, data services versus actual execution services. In the real world, we've seen organizations sometimes creatively combine these for useful reasons, but you need to be really clear about that. Certainly the vendors themselves, as I mentioned here, are very keen on advancing into this area. They play that way a more decisive footprint in your marketing stack. You've got to ask yourself, is this really what I want out of a CDP or not? This then brings us to our fifth and penultimate trend, which is there's really a growing expertise shortage in this space, and it revolves around the CDPs themselves, which are new to many marketing teams. And CDPs also, although they run on known cloud platforms typically, are often very proprietary in the way that they work. So we know that you need some expertise in that specific CDP, which is a challenge because there's 30 of them in the market. But then there's a number of other core issues around this to be successful that we know you need. And so once again, I would kind of bifurcate between data management on the left of this dotted line and then data activation on the right of this. And so for data management, you need integration engineers, data engineers of various types, data scientists of various types, certainly campaign managers, and then there's definitely marketing analysts and marketing ops people. And a lot of these platforms assume that you have this talent. And now, to some extent, you can find support on the left from systems integrators, although again, their capabilities are going to tend to be fairly generic rather than platform specific. On the right, you can get some support from your CDP vendor on things that are platform specific, but it's not the same as having these kinds of capabilities in-house. And so, you know, I think that at just the time when I think you're going to need more muscle here, there's going to be a kind of a shortage of protein, you might say. And so you really want to think hard about building and maintaining a team in an environment where those skills are in really high demand. And this is another reason why you may want to be cautious about overbuying in this marketplace if you can't actually bring the appropriate level of human resources to bear to fully leverage these sorts of capabilities. Okay. Promised you a bonus sixth trend here, and then we are going to have a little bit of time for questions. So if you have any questions at all, feel free, or anything that you agree with, anything you disagree with, any other commentary, feel free to use the questions tab in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll have some time to address that here in a minute or two. Aaron from Texas is asking what this strange white stuff is falling outside my window. A nor'easter has hit the East Coast, and it has reached down here today to the Mid-Atlantic where I live, and we're having our first snowfall of the season, so very exciting for us and our dog. But in any case, also a propitious time to be indoors talking to you all about my favorite topic, which is the CDP marketplace. And so that brings us to our bonus Nontrend, and it really revolves around the market, which, as I mentioned before, there's various ways to slice and dice this market. One way to do it is to divide between CDPs from these sort of MarTech suite vendors versus more pure play platforms. Now, some of these pure play platforms, like Segment and a few others, have been acquired by larger firms, but they're not going away. They're still fairly independent CDPs. The suite vendors in 2019, the big story there was that they finally ended up rolling out their own. In almost every case, they built rather than acquired their core CDP capabilities. And so the non-story here is that you would think, and there's been some noise in the analyst industry, that the arrival of these suite vendors is somehow going to massively disrupt this marketplace. And I think that that has actually not happened, and in fact, it's unlikely to happen for the next couple of years. In other words, the non-story is that these vendors have not been terribly disruptive, and there's some reasons for that that you can find in our research, but I'll highlight a couple of points. One is that their platforms tend to be new and fairly immature. These vendors don't have a great history of building tools from scratch, certainly not in the last 5 or 10 years, and that's what they're doing here, and it hasn't necessarily worked out so well. The second thing is that the scope of these platforms, and at least in their early incarnations, tend to be fairly narrow and associated with providing data for the other tools in their suite, as opposed to being this independent enterprise foundation layer in your stack. So the way I would describe this is that they are excessively parochial at a time when you need your CDP to be a lot more universalist. So I'm not very sanguine about these particular platforms. Although there's obviously a lot of heft behind them, it's probably going to take a couple of years for them to be really serious, significant players in the marketplace. So that's a non-trend for 2021. All right, let's wrap up and then answer your question. So for each one of our trends, we're going to give you some customer advice, because that's what we do, is advise large enterprises. And so the first thing is make sure you understand where CDP is going to fit within your broader customer data fabric. And that data fabric may be a sophisticated set of capabilities, some of which you may want in your CDP, some of which you may want externally from your CDP. And you want to be careful that you're very clear about what's going to live where. And we spend a lot of our advisory time with our own subscribers, kind of helping them sort that through. CDP may not be the right place for advanced modeling or machine learning based activation. Because you may not have access to all the data you need, and you may have already made much more significant investments elsewhere in your stack that can't really be replicated in your CDP. If you're exploring CDP capabilities next year, I would strongly encourage you not just to think about your marketing use cases, but some of your other enterprise use cases. First of all, it builds a more robust business case, but also we're discovering in some cases where some of our subscribers who licensed the CDP 2 or 3 years ago are now literally back in the market for a replacement CDP, because the first one really didn't grow with their use cases. You definitely want to draw a clear line between CDP as a back-end support platform providing data and segments, and maybe some light eventing, versus a true execution and delivery environment. These are two different things from a performance standpoint, going to have serious licensing and cost implications, security, everything else. You do want to plan for this looming and growing expertise shortage, and certainly build some internal muscle around capabilities that may not be platform specific, and you may have to rely more on the vendor for more platform specific, integrations and other sorts of capabilities. You may want to budget for that. Don't default to the major MarTech suite vendor CDP. So you may already have made a significant investment in Oracle, or Acoustic, or Acquia. Certainly Adobe and Salesforce come to mind here. Don't just default to their CDP. There's a very good chance it's going to be immature, poor fit, and not a truly independent layer in your stack. So you definitely want to do your research. This is certainly an area where Real Story Group can help you. This is what we do, is we apply research to help organizations like yours make good decisions. There's 3 ways that you can work with us. The first one is simply to subscribe to our research, for example, just the customer data line here for a year, and get access to our decision-making tools, which allow you to generate things like custom quadrants and custom shortlists using our kind of business use case scenario modeling, which really allows you to apply your own specific circumstances to get to the right vendor fit. Second way that enterprises work with us is simply to license everything that we have as a full stack subscription. Then we help advise them on their stack choices. And then a subset of those take advantage of our third offering, which is our private, confidential peer council of enterprise MarTech stack leaders. And so that meets every couple of months. It's been a wonderful way for us to share lessons with each other. And with that, I'll see if there are any questions at all. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the GoToWebinar panel. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes to answer them. So James is asking, do you recommend large enterprises deploy MDMs, or master data management systems, alongside CDPs? So the short answer is yes. Particularly if you're a large enterprise, typically there's some sort of MDM behind the scenes that's doing some mastering, and that the CDP may not be the right place to do that. And so we typically do say that you may want to leverage a service. Among other things, is that you may want to have that customer master then be used in other places along with other enterprise master data elsewhere in the enterprise, and so the CDP just becomes one more kind of downstream location for that. Julie is asking, if you're just starting your journey and recognize the talent gap and the value it's brought in the market, what can you do now to help jumpstart efforts? In other words, do identity resolution append now, build models with intent to append later? Yeah, so well, those are kind of a big question and then some specific questions. Those are great questions, Julie. And I think the answer is, anything you can do now with respect to data prep is a good thing. And whether that's any kind of onboarding and resolution and enrichment of that data, even though you don't have necessarily a CDP, there's a place to put that golden record. Any work you can do now is just going to accelerate your implementation. What we see a lot is enterprises licensing a CDP and then going back and doing all this data management and prep, and they're sitting on their license for 8 months before they ever do even a single activation, and that's clearly a waste. Ben is saying, not a question, but we're a small enterprise. We plan to use an MDM to connect to our CDP. That's a great point, Ben. It's not just larger enterprises that might do that. Smaller enterprises might also have an MDM, and if you have one or you're going to get one, it is a very useful, some people would say, in many cases, essential supplement or almost precondition for a CDP. So James is asking again, what do you say to organizations that say their data lake is their CDP? Are they seeing the big picture? No. A data lake is not a CDP. A data lake is a place where you throw everything in and then see if you can glean something interesting out of it later. A CDP is really more akin to a data mart, which is that it is a functionally specific subset of data that you're going to actually act against and operate against. And so typically a data lake is not an operational platform like that. Alexis is asking, do you anticipate further consolidation in this sector? No, I don't anticipate consolidation. I do anticipate some M&A, but not necessarily vendors going away. So that's really what consolidation is. Hey, we're going to go from like 30 to 15, or 5, like we saw with ERP platforms. I don't believe that's going to happen. I think that these systems that we're covering are now fairly, reasonably robust. They have, decent marginal cost structures that they can handle with their existing customer bases. So I don't think that CDP vendors are going to start disappearing. Some of them are going to sell themselves, but the products and the platforms themselves are not necessarily going to go away. And I don't think there's an opportunity for someone to come in and roll up and combine CDPs here. That's not going to work very well. Great. That takes us now to Scott, who's going to wrap up. I just want to say thank you for those tremendous questions, and really always welcome engaging with you and encourage you to keep talking to us here.
Great, absolutely. And thanks, Tony, and thanks to everyone else for participating. Certainly appreciate your time today. And as Tony mentioned, you'll be able to access these slides in the coming days. This actually wraps up our webinars for the year. So we want to thank you all for your participation, not just today, but throughout the year, and wish you a happy holiday season and a happy new year. And also do want to invite you to continue engaging with us. Reach out at explore@realstorygroup.com if you're interested in learning about whether it's our CDP research or perhaps our Stack Leadership Council, which we'll be meeting again in late January. Please reach out. Again, it's explore@realstorygroup.com. So for Tony, this is Scott Dill signing off with Real Story Group. And again, happy holidays and happy new year. Take care.